India's largest stock exchange, NSE, has been indeed going through challenging time and perhaps one of its worst crises at the top management after the exit of former MD and CEO Chitra Ramakrishna. Also, this is all happening at a time when the exchange was preparing the roadmap for perhaps one of the largest IPOs in the exchange space in India. Also, on the other hand, there have been regulatory challenges on the derivatives trade that the exchange has been facing. How the exchange is going to handle these challenging times, what is going to be the game plan? To discuss all that and much more in detail, we have with us none other than Chairman of NSE himself, Mr. Ashok Chawla. Mr. Chawla, thanks for sparing this time and speaking to ET now. I know you have weathered many such as storms earlier during your various avatars in the bureaucracy. If you could throw some light on what has happened in NSE in the last couple of weeks, how soon do you think the top management will be in place, and perhaps what is going to be the roadmap? Because now it would be all eyes on you and the board on how they are going to see these challenging times.
Well, I won't say it's a challenge. It's a phase in the journey of the organization, and the phase that we are going through, as you mentioned, is that the chief executive has resigned for personal reasons. The board has immediately set up a selection committee, which it is required to do as per the SEBI regulations, and we started the process of searching for a new MD and CEO. A search partner has been appointed to assist the selection committee in that process. We will be putting out advertisements in the public space and inviting suitable people to apply. The whole process, as we see it today, from start to finish, should not take more than 2 to 2.5 months. So we will, in all probability, have somebody at the helm by the end of February 2017. So that's not really, I won't call it a challenge, but yes, this is a process of transition that we are going through.
Interesting, Mr. Chawla, as you were mentioning, in this process of transition, if we just step back and see, although we all know that the former MD and CEO has cited personal reasons for her resignation, but clearly, do you want to set the record straight? Because there have been many theories doing the round that perhaps the board and the CEO are not in sync when it comes to how the IPO process should be. There were regulatory issues which we will touch upon. So do you want to set the record straight on why Chitra Ramakrishna, who has been associated in building this exchange for these many years, all of a sudden took this decision and this vacuum has been created?
Well, what the MD told us is that she has been thinking of it for some time. She has personal issues at home. And beyond that, I don't think we need to speculate, because the process of the public offer through the listing process is ongoing and will continue. It's not as if that was anything which came up suddenly, which caused this storm in a teacup. So I think we shouldn't read too much into some of these things. These are normal arrivals and departures which organizations go through.
Okay, interesting. Mr. Chawla, if you could throw some light on IPO, that is one thing which everyone has been keeping a close watch on, because we all know when it comes to valuation, perhaps NSE would be one of the best valued as and when the listing happens, the potential that it has. Is the IPO roadmap on track in spite of what has happened in the last 15 days at the helm of management affairs? And if you could throw some light, how soon do we see the DRHP officially getting filed with SEBI?
The process for filing the DRHP is absolutely on track. We had put in the public domain initially that we will file it by the end of January. Then we brought it forward to 20th December, and we are committed to filing it with SEBI by the 20th of December. So in that sense, the process is on track. I'm sure you'll want to know, with the change at the management leadership, what will be the impact on the process. I would say that it's going to be marginal. There may be slight slippage because the issue will have to be marketed, and it is best marketed and best sold to the prospective investors if there is a full-time CEO in position. So at best one may see a slippage of a month or two, not more than that.
Okay. And Mr. Chawla, coming back to the IPO, now we all know self-listing, which was an issue which has been discussed and debated over the years, but finally market regulator has its own regulations in place. So A, is that issue settled? NSE has agreed or will be listing itself in BSE, which BSE has already said that they are comfortable doing it in NSE. And secondly, sir, also on the whole valuation aspect, if you could throw some light, because that is what the markets are eagerly awaiting.
Well, we are quite committed to listing as per the regulations of SEBI, which means that we have to list on the other exchange, and there will be no self-listing. There's no doubt on that. As regards valuation, I don't think one can go into that at this stage. There will be models which the bankers will build. There will be models which the analysts will build, and ultimately the market will put a price on it. So I think it's a bit premature and certainly inappropriate for me to make any comments on that at this stage.
Clearly, you're keeping your cards close to the chest and valuation. Mr. Chawla, on the whole overseas listing aspect, that is once again be an issue of debate, because market regulator somewhere say overseas listing perhaps is not possible in the current regulations, but NSE is on record saying after the domestic listing they will look at an overseas listing perhaps after April 2017. So what is an update on that? Would overseas listing still be on agenda, or you have shelved the plans because SEBI is not in sync with what NSE is thinking?
No, let me sort of clarify that. It was not overseas listing in lieu of domestic listing. Even at that stage, the board had decided that we will list domestically and then subsequently, little later, look at an overseas listing option. That remains on the table, but for the present, the focus and the energy will go into ensuring that the domestic listing takes place, and at the appropriate time, NSE may choose to go for an overseas listing.
But does that mean you are constantly in touch, of course, with market regulator? You are trying to pursue them to see how an overseas listing can be possible?
No, I don't think SEBI prohibits overseas listing. We will just have to ensure that we follow the regulations and the laws of the countries where we are going to list and come up to the standards of what is expected there.
This is a very interesting aspect, Mr. Chawla, because this is for the first time it's been said on record saying that SEBI regulations doesn't prohibit, because clearly the opinion coming out, at least from the SEBI experts, were divided, saying currently SEBI regulations is very silent when it comes to overseas listing, and perhaps there have to be some amendments that could have perhaps to be done, because current regulations don't provide overseas listing. So you are clearly saying that it doesn't prohibit. So you have already had the communications with regulator on the same?
My understanding is that SEBI applies to domestic listing. It is a regulator for the domestic economy. So whatever their regulations are for domestic listing. If a company chooses to list either exclusively abroad or in addition to domestic listing, those are beyond the rules and regulations of the domestic regulator. So there the regulations of those countries and their authorities would necessarily apply. And the same applies when companies get listed on the New York Stock Exchange and so on and so forth. Those are done by the companies based on those regulations.
If I could ask you, still post your domestic listing, 2017 would be a realistic target where you will explore and the overseas listing process would be completed?
No, I can't really give you a commitment on that. We'll revisit this issue once we've gone through this process.
Mr. Chawla, coming back to your current set of investors, you have big names like Goldman Sachs or Temasek. What is the feedback that you have got during the interactions? Would they like to stay put in NSE, or would they want to enhance their investments via the IPO route? How is that? Because at the end of the day, now clearly there's a window also for foreign investors to hold up to 15% in the new regulations. So what are the initial feedback that you have got?
One thing is very clear, that everybody regards NSE as a well-run, commercially very good opportunity to invest in. That is the reason why we have large number of investors. Now, what we have got as a feedback from the investors is that they will try to sell part of the equity that they hold, because they need to also get proper valuations, market-based valuations based on the investment that they have made. But they would also be keen, most of them would also be keen to continue to be partners in the journey of NSE and to reap those benefits and rewards later in time. So it will be a mix of both, and that's appropriate because the SEBI regulations require that at least 10% should be offered for sale. We will be offering, or the existing shareholders will be offering, much more than that when we come out with the draft prospectus.
If you could throw some light on how much it could be, because we all know it's perhaps going to be an OFS, because BSE also the same process, NSE also, the existing shareholders will exit. So in that sense, how much in terms of percentage would be put out for, say, bidders to come and buy and thereby hold NSE shares?
Well, it would be somewhere in the range of 20 to 25%.
It's interesting, 20 to 25%, because BSE is going to be a very small tranche in that sense. And sir, once again, if I could push my luck and ask you in terms of timing, although BSE had the first mover advantage when it comes to the whole of IPO, there are indications that they may look perhaps once they get the DRHP clearance somewhere in January or February. Do we see still NSE catching up, both the exchanges listing somewhere happening close to nearby each other?
Well, I'm not quite aware of the BSE timelines, but we should be looking at a listing sometime now based on the recent developments, sometime maybe in the second quarter of calendar 2017.
Now, with the IPO roadmap, clearly you're throwing some light, finally all facts in place and a clear picture emerging. The other challenge under your leadership that NSE is at this point of time facing is also on certain regulatory issues that you're facing on the derivatives trade. This is once again an area where for many known reasons NSE has been very quiet. Do you once again want to set the record straight? Where does NSE stand on the whole derivative trade investigation that SEBI was doing? What is the role that board is playing at this point of time, and how soon could we see a clear clarity emerging between NSE and SEBI on this whole controversy?
Well, I take it you are referring to the matter relating to the use of the technology platform. Algo trade.
Exactly.
SEBI had asked the board to get an investigation done by an independent third party. We had commissioned that agency. That report has just come in. In fact, the board of directors is meeting this afternoon to consider that report, and then based on that we will convey whatever the investigator has told us to SEBI, so that SEBI can then take a final call, because the ultimate decision will have to be that of the regulator. They can take a final call on how they want to proceed in the matter.
But Mr. Chawla, SEBI also has asked the board to fix individual responsibility and submit a report, I believe in a span of 3 months.
Yeah.
Any update on that, and have you been able to clearly say zero in on where the defects were, or what rectification actions that the board has initiated?
See, this is one of the terms of reference of the investigator. So based on whatever the investigator tells, and this is an independent external agency, those who are experts in doing forensic audit. So based on their report, whatever comes out, if there is any complicity, certainly the board will take action and report to SEBI. If no individual complicity is found by the investigator and nothing is conveyed to us, then there will be a different decision on that.
But then is it also right to conclude that at the technology level there were some errors, there was an issue, and clearly that has been or will be addressed to the satisfaction of the regulator?
See, there are two things. One, let's not prejudge what the investigation is going to say. Second, on a broader plane, technology is something which keeps evolving. So whatever was the technology 5 years ago, if there were certain things which were not present or should have been there, these things get addressed over a period of time. The technology today may be found wanting after 3 or 5 years. So technology is something which is a process of evolution. The whole point is whether for malafide reasons or consciously something wrong was chosen or something wrong was done. That is, I think, what we need to look at. And if something wrong was done, then of course responsibility needs to be fixed and action taken. But if it is a normal march of technology, which in hindsight people say was inappropriate, but has since been rectified, then it's an entirely different situation. And here I'm speaking purely conceptually.
Absolutely. Mr. Chawla, but in that sense, would you like to once again put a time frame where clearly the board will have a clear picture and a control on whatever has happened when it comes to algo trade and derivative trade, and say by X date the rectification will be done and clearly the market or the people trading don't have to worry on any aspects?
No, I don't think the people need to worry, but in any case on this particular matter, which dates to a period which was many years ago, we will have finality definitely before the end of this month. The report and our views would be conveyed to SEBI.
And any specific steps or say mechanisms that the board would want to put in place in NSE that such issues don't crop up in the future? Because clearly this was the only issue which clearly came as a controversy in this existence of NSE, because NSE always has been known for its credibility or for the technology revolution that it brought in the exchange space. So clearly this was a blip in that sense.
Well, I don't know whether it's a blip or not, that we'll see from the investigation. But the fundamental point which we focus on, and we'll continue to focus on, that there should be appropriate checks and balances, so that there is no opportunity or possibility for the system to be deliberately manipulated. And if it so happens, and it can happen, because there is the possibility that in any organization that kind of thing may happen despite the best intentions, then the action should be swift and it should be punitive. So that's the philosophy which the exchange, I think, has followed, and we will continue to focus on that.
Mr. Chawla, I also cover SEBI as one of my beats very closely. I know you have been personally monitoring this whole issue almost on a day-to-day basis. You had your own discussions at the highest level at SEBI with SEBI chairman. Do you think somewhere any regulatory censure would be a possibility in this particular issue for NSE, and NSE will have to face that?
How can I say what SEBI will do?
At least SEBI has been saying that there have been issues and we are trying to address it.
Well, I suppose you need to ask them, but what they had told us is to get this investigation done. They left it to the board, so we are getting that done. We will report to them.
Okay. And Mr. Chawla, before moving on, once again, clearly that you all, I am sure, off the record, many people must have asked you, or this has been a discussion. Is there somewhere fixing responsibility at the management level an issue which perhaps the former MD and CEO also decided to take this decision? This has been an issue which is at least been brewing under her leadership. Has there been any discussion when she was there as MD and CEO between the board and the MD and CEO on this whole issue?
On which issue?
On the whole issue of algo trading and the controversy surrounding the derivatives trade.
Of course, this has been discussed many times in the technology committee of the exchange and the board of directors. There's a committee of the stock exchange which went into it, based on which the response of the stock exchange was sent to SEBI. SEBI wanted a further investigation by an independent agency. So it's not as if the management has not been part of this whole exercise. They necessarily have to be there.
So this decision has nothing to do with what was happening in this particular area, because there have been other resignations also which has happened at the highest level at NSE.
I think we shouldn't focus too much on resignations. They cannot be linked to events which may be happening even otherwise, or the dynamism of a certain process, whether it is a technology related issue or whether it's a IPO related issue. They're different streams.
Okay. Mr. Chawla, if looking ahead into the future, we know, as you're rightly saying, there'll be a new MD and CEO perhaps in the next couple of months. As a head of NSE board, what are the three areas, what are the three things that the board wants the new CEO to focus on when he's on board? Because clearly he'll be taking over in a transition phase.
Well, immediate maybe short term would be, of course, the listing, which is in the pipeline. Number two will be better, maybe improved relations with external stakeholders, including the regulator and the shareholders. And three, which any board would want, active engagement with the board of directors and high levels of corporate governance, for which the exchange is in a way responsible even for other entities which are listed on it. So we should be having and prescribing the same thresholds for ourselves.
And sir, in terms of, since now the hunt is begin for getting a new CEO, in terms of the background or in terms of getting people, how open have you kept the window where you would get people from, say, financial or for that matter, overseas experience hand? What is the kind of personality that you are looking at, and what is the kind of particular area or background that you would be zeroing on some person to lead NSE?
Some of these things will, of course, appear in the advertisement which we put out in the next few days. But very broadly speaking, it will necessarily have to be a person who has knowledge of and experience in the financial sector. Need not be specifically in exchange, but certainly financial sector, capital markets. The person will have to be a very good leader with demonstrated capacity for effective leadership of organizations. And beyond that, it doesn't matter where he or she comes from, what's the kind of background that they have. But that's the reason why we have, as I mentioned to you, we have a selection committee which is broad-based, which has independent directors as well as experts from outside. And then they will make their recommendations and the board will decide.
Shala, my last couple of questions before we could wrap up this interview. In terms of the International Finance Center which is being set up in Gandhinagar, it's been a pet project of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We all know NSE has also signed MOU, it's shown interest. There are indications that BSE will finally inaugurate it during the upcoming Vibrant Gujarat. If you could throw some light on what is going to be NSE's plan and how soon could we see NSE's center in IFC getting operationalized?
Well, NSE is equally interested in having this business opportunity which is available there in the international center. The preparations are in the final stages. We hope to have an active presence there maybe in the next 45 days or so. So maybe by early February.
Okay. And my last question, so I need to touch upon this because I've been covering the exchange space for the longest of time. In the country there are only two exchanges, NSE and BSE. But for some reason there has been an animosity on various issues. Even on basic issues we see both the exchanges fail to arrive at a consensus. Do you think going forward under your leadership and perhaps also the reciprocation coming in from BSE, we could see both the exchanges also working in tandem on many of the issues in markets and are not at loggerheads, which traditionally has been the case?
Well, both yes and no. Yes, because on larger policy issues there should be certain amount of coordination between both the exchanges or whatever number of players there are in the market. But don't forget that they are ultimately competitors also. So you cannot have a situation where the two are so much hand in glove that competition is stifled. So that also cannot be so the pendulum has to be somewhere in between, where on bigger policy issues there is coordination, but there is effective competition in the marketplace. So there will be an element of rivalry in whatever they do.
How often do you speak to your colleague, BSE chairman? Does that happen?
Quite often. He's an old colleague of mine. We joined the civil service together.
And Mr. Chawla, on a closing note, how are you enjoying this particular tenure? You have seen and occupied the highest positions in bureaucracy. How has this experience been for you?
Well, I didn't realize when I came in that it would be choppy waters. I presume they will settle after some time.
Mr. Chawla, once again, thanks a lot for sparing this and pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.